Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for people here in Brazil. It's late here, 11 p.m. I'm Luciana Gomes from Lean Institute Brazil, and it's a pleasure for me to introduce you to our guest, Katie Anderson. Katie is an internationally recognized leadership consultant, coach, professional speaker, and learning enthusiast. Dedicated to helping purpose-driven leaders create cultures of learning and accelerate their individual and organizational impact. She's also the author of the best-selling book, Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn, which has received multiple international awards, including a Shingo Publication Award, and has been translated into over 8 languages, many of them by our Lean Global Network institutes, including Brazilian Portuguese by me, representing the Lean Institute Brazil. And hi, Katie, I'm very happy to share a stage with you again, a virtual stage this time. We shared the same stage previously here in São Paulo during our Lean Summit this year. Could you please tell us a little bit about your book? How was the writing process and how is it structured, please?
Thank you, Luciana. I am so happy to be back on stage with you too and to be connecting with everyone around the globe, no matter what time it is or if you're watching this later. So for some context, back in 2020, I published a book that I'd worked on for several years, capturing Toyota leader Isao Yoshino's 40 plus years of wisdom and experience. And for those of you who don't know who Isao Yoshino is, he was John Shook's the head of the Lean Global Institute, his first boss at Toyota, and John credits Mr. Yoshino with the one who really taught him about what lean means and what it means to be a leader, to create a lean learning environment. And I had the great pleasure and honor to get to know him when I lived in Japan for 2 years in 2015 and 16, and we're very close personal friends today. When I was starting to work on this book with intention, Mr. Yoshino and I envisioned that it might first be both of our shared stories. But as I was doing more and more intentional interviews to discover, his learnings, it was clear 40 years of wisdom and all of this rich behind the scenes Toyota history needed to be shared in its whole. And so I shifted my mindset and thinking about that structure. So I probably have another book in me, but not yet. But I was really trying to think about how can I honor what I considered, and I kept saying, these 2 threads of purpose for Mr. Yoshino. And I would say he has these 2 threads, one of which was his deep desire to live internationally and to connect with people outside of Japan and to have this bigger life experience. And at the same time, this other sense of purpose about learning and helping other people learn. And he shared with me this metaphor in Japan about kimono, or, the traditional clothing weavers.
Yeah.
And I had this beautiful aha, because Toyota came from a weaving company that, was founded as a weaving company. But the weaving metaphor of warp threads, and I'll show you on the book if you can see it. These are those threads that are set down at the beginning of a loom, those straight threads, which are known and they're constant and they really tend to not break. And then the weft threads are the ones that are interwoven. And in the metaphor, the warp threads are those parts of your purpose that deep inside of you. It's like your known, your spirit, your determination, the things that are just core to who you are, even if maybe you aren't as aware of what those are, but they've always been there and guided your life and been the foundation for how you've led your life. And then the weft threads are those things that you learn through experience, and they can break. There could be failures, there could be challenges, there could be thick times and thin ones. And it's this intersection between the known and then discovered through the process that really creates our unique purpose and our life fabric. And that was I find that a beautiful metaphor to think about our own lives and how we go through life, both knowing things about ourselves and continually discovering them. and then also gave me the foundation, the loom, might you say, to weave the stories of Mr. Yoshino's life, both his personal desire to live overseas and then all of the things he was learning through his professional life about what it means to lead and to learn together.
Yeah, I think this metaphor is so beautiful. And in the first part of the book, as you explain, you discuss Yoshino's vertical thread, the warp, the purpose, and how this purpose shaped his career path. I have been to your workshop here in Brazil. It was wonderful. And so I know purpose is one of your favorite themes. In your view, what is the importance of pursuing our personal purposes, and how can we connect that with our work, with our career?
Yeah, so often at work, we end up being focused on the outcomes and the results and the doing, which of course is important, but we lose sight of that sort of human connection and sense of purpose. And in fact, already twice today, I've done an exercise that I've done with thousands of leaders globally. You've experienced this, Luciana, and I learned from one of my coaching friends and mentors, Karen Ross, but it's to draw and like draw your purpose and what's important to you and share that. And when we do that, we realize that actually we have some very common things in our humanity around creating human connection. It's either your community, your team members, your family. Most people have something in there about learning or developing or helping other people do the same, or something that gives you joy. And when we can reconnect at work on that sort of that shared human purpose, we are actually able to do so much more together. That's what fosters that teamwork, that fosters the collaboration, the problem solving, so that we're actually better able to do the doing and achieve the outcomes. And so really when we can then connect our work also to how does that align with the things that are most important to us, it helps us be more effective as well and create more joy and fulfillment. And so we talk all about, how do we have more team engagement and how do we have more problem solving? But if we can get back to that shared humanity, that's the wonderful foundation to really to focus on.
Yeah, and I think that you have found your purpose in your career.
I have, and it's through a bit of iteration. It was interesting. The very first drawing I did had a globe with people around it, and I had a lot of other things on it, but now that's the essence. And I really come to understand it both in my personal life and my professional life. It's about connecting hearts and minds of people so that we can make the world a better place. And everything I do comes back to that. And I've lived around the world in 6 countries outside of the US. And so that really is very meaningful to me.
Yeah. And I see that you have a lot of joy doing your work, and that makes it wonderful. And going back to Yoshino, one of Yoshino's statements repeated several times in the book is the only secret to Toyota is its attitude toward learning. We don't even notice and take it for granted. Could you please comment on that? I like this phrase also very, very much.
Oh, I do too. It's the phrase that I chose to open the book with. And it was the question on my mind the most. So I met Mr. Yoshino several months before I moved to Japan with my family. And he was actually on stage at a Lean event with John Shook talking about his role as manager and direct report at that time. And so many wonderful learnings that have also show up in the book. But he gave me his card and said, let me come visit me and I'll take you to Toyota City. And as I was starting to spend time and I kept going back and visiting him, the question on my mind is, what was the secret to Toyota's success? Because look, we're all here at the Lean Global Connection. Everyone listening to this is wanting to create a lean culture in their organization. We're trying to emulate what Toyota has been able to create and do in our own environments. And I was like, what is that secret? Why has Toyota been more effective in doing this and creating it? And all these companies want to emulate or copy, or not copy them, but like bring in those principles. And, he kept saying, there's no secret. And except then one day he did say, the only secret to Toyota is its attitude towards learning. The only secret to Toyota is its attitude towards learning. I want you all to hold that with you, because we focus on the West so much on the visible tools, the outcomes, the process, and all those are really important, like the production principles, for sure. We can't lose sight of those either. But really, the way they are that those tools are effective because of the attitude towards learning and the attitude towards developing people's capability of learning and giving the space for learning, which includes making mistakes, having experiments, truly having time for the plan, do, check, act cycle, and not just focusing on the do. And so this is what we have often missed, is both this connection to a greater purpose and really, really creating and leading with an attitude towards learning. Not just like, oh, yeah, we want to create a learning organization, but what does that really mean to do and embody? And that's what I really wanted to capture in my book, is that it wasn't just this magical thing that happened at Toyota. There was real intentionality, real people, and failures as well, but it all came back to moving forward with an attitude towards learning, even when major failures happen.
And is it possible for other organizations to replicate Toyota's success? What does it mean for a leader to be serious about creating this learning culture, this culture of continuous improvement?
Yeah, so I absolutely believe that any of your organizations with that true seriousness can create a learning culture. Now, it's going to look different than Toyota's. So it doesn't all need to look the same. It needs to be right for your environment, for your people, for the problems that you're trying to solve. But this comment around seriousness actually came out. So I lead trips to Japan for global leaders. I did 2 this year, one in May and one in October, to come to Japan to learn from Mr. Yoshino, to come to learn from other companies and Toyota suppliers and more. And one of the questions that was asked to Mr. Yoshino was, why has Toyota been able to do this? And he said, it's because the leaders are serious. And then some of the Toyota suppliers too, you said you can see that they're serious. And by serious, it's not that like, oh, they're, no fun is serious. They actually all embody this true, by seriousness, it meant this commitment, not just from words, like I endorse us being a lean organization, but a seriousness in applying the behaviors and modeling the way themselves and really creating that culture by leading it by example and doing it, not just through saying, yeah, I endorse this. So his question back to people is like, are your leaders really serious about this? Or are they just saying they want the outcomes, but they're not willing to do it themselves? And so that what I've seen is the biggest gap in organizations really being able to do this, is how serious are they in truly being able to apply and practice the behaviors and the mindset at all levels.
Yeah.
But it is possible. It's totally possible. We just have to be serious and have a long-term view.
Difficult things in the world today.
Yeah.
And Katie, you talk a lot about intentional leadership or leading with intention. Could you explain what you mean by that to us?
Yeah, so intention is one of my most favorite and important words. And I learned a deeper meaning from that word when I moved to Japan. And it's all about Japanese language, but I was studying the language, really curious. And I had the word intention put on my business cards as a placeholder because I didn't have a logo. I just started my consulting practice a year before we moved to Japan, and I didn't have business cards. I mean, who has business cards these days? And I learned that the symbols in Japanese of the word shiko mean the kokoro sashi, which is the strength of your heart. So it's a samurai in your heart. And then a symbol meaning direction. And so if we go back to purpose, it's like, what's your purpose? Who do you want to be? What's the impact you want to have? And then what are the actions you need to take to actually fulfill that impact, to fulfill your purpose? And so it's not just like setting an intention, but embodying your intention, fulfilling your intention with action. It's like taking that mindset and that purpose into action. And one of the biggest challenges and gaps I see, and this is, some of my biggest challenges and gaps too, where my fumbles happen, is when most leaders have this desire to like help other people and to create learning and to have a good, positive, environment, but that the habits we've developed through our careers and through our schooling may not actually have the impact that we need or want when we're in a people development or a leadership role. So like, being the person with all the answers and having all the ideas and shifting into when is it the time for me to be an expert with and do the problem solving? And when is my role really to set that direction and like where we need to go, but then providing the support and the space for people to get there. And that is a huge shift that's really hard to make. And it requires us to put attention into that. But so that's why intention is so important to me. It's like understanding your purpose and your impact, but also what are the habits and actions that really, really will fulfill that.
Oh, yes. And in the book, you have a whole chapter about failure, and you discuss failure many, many other times. What is, in your view, the connection between being allowed to fail and building a culture of continuous improvement?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about this at the beginning of our session about how if we had the answer already and we knew it was right, we're not actually like growing and achieving so much more. And having the space for failures or not having the right answer and learning from it is actually so critical to being able to get better at getting better. And we, of course, we don't want massive failures and we don't want catastrophic, we don't want anyone to get hurt or, like those are things none of us want, but to err is human. And so how do we, and to not have the right answer right away is also part of the learning process. So how do we get better at knowing that's the inherent part of learning, and how do we respond to it? There's this story that I tell all the time about Mr. Yoshino's first, like I say this in the beginning of the book, his time at Toyota is really bookended by two huge failures of different magnitudes. One was a sort of small mistake that had a big impact, and the other was like a multi-year massive business failure. And this is the end of the book, which is a decade-long a business expense, new business venture, which he tried and failed at and cost the company $13 million. But the response was the same from leadership. So the first was during his orientation, Mr. Yoshino was assigned to a paint shop where he needed to do one simple task, pour a can of paint and a can of solvent into a big vat. And then as the cars came down the line, it would get, sprayed onto the cars. And one day the paint was like literally not sticking to the cars. And one of the managers runs in and says, 100 cars have to be repainted, and all eyes go on Mr. Yoshino. But they didn't blame him. They didn't yell at him. In fact, guess what they did? They thanked him for making that mistake, which is like, he was even laughing, remembering this. Like, what a different, like, what do you think? Those of you who are listening, like, what would happen in your company if you made a mistake and 100 whatever of your product had to be redone and it was going to cost time and money? Like, at the very least, someone would probably get mad at you, but thank you for making that mistake because it highlighted that they had an opportunity to learn and do something different next time. So that subtle shift is so important. And then at the end of his career, when he made this huge failure, and this was a very hard chapter to write, and it took many years for me to ask the questions in a way where he really started to reflect and be okay to share, because it was a really painful failure for him. And but there was a shift in him and being able to think about this as a learning experience. It actually was a positive thing. But at the end, he said, even Mr. Cho, who was then the chairman and president of Toyota, at the end of this failed multi-million-dollar water ski boat venture, said, thank you for trying. You tried your hardest, and we each, the company and you, we all made some different mistakes, but we learned from it, and we both tried our hardest. And so he wasn't fired, he wasn't demoted, he was given another good assignment. This is towards the end of his career. And it was all through this attitude towards learning. What can we learn from this experience that we can apply to the future? And how do we look at process and not blame the person, as long as it comes from a genuine attempt at doing the right thing?
Yes.
And so, yeah. So, I mean, it's so hard. So how do we check our own like natural human instincts for blame or looking at people on that? Yeah.
Yeah. It's something exceptional, really. And we still don't have any questions. Please, if you have any questions, you can put a question in the question and answer. I'll keep asking. So one thing that I learned from you, and it was about the labeling thing. I thought it was so interesting in your keynote session. And so I will ask you to explain to the people, because I think that is something very, very powerful. I began to do that sometimes to explain people why I'm doing some things, and I think it works really. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, yes, for sure. And first, I'm going to ask you a question, and I will label what I'm doing and why. So when someone asks you a question or shares something with you, there's usually even more behind that. And so if you can ask another question, you'll get even more context from them before you answer with your ideas and more. So I'm curious, Luciana, like what's one thing that you experienced that was different from making the shift and asking people? And I'll explain. Labeling means just sharing what you're doing and why. So the reason what you're doing and making explicit your actions and the reason behind them. So just what I'm doing right now. So what was something that you experienced as a result of that?
I think because we are, as leaders, we are always trying to show people to be a reference, but sometimes we don't explain what we are trying to do. And for people, it's like they have to guess why we are doing things, and we want them to understand. So why we don't talk about that explicitly? So for me, it was like an insight, something different that I started to do.
Yes, so exactly. And so learning the sort of soft skills of leadership is not necessarily easy. And there are two things of why I say it's really important for us to label what we're doing. So explaining to people what we're doing and why. One, it role models the effective behavior and the purpose behind it. So saying like, I want to ask you some open-ended questions because I want to hear what you're thinking, and that will help me understand how I can be most helpful to you. So that's also the second point is it's holding you true to your intentions by sharing that as well. And it's then modeling that behavior of like, oh, to that person, oh, that person's asking that question for that reason. It also takes away that sort of suspicion of why are they doing that? Yes. Maybe you're someone who used to, they expect you because you're the facilitator at the front of the room, or because you're the leader, they tend to expect you to come in with the answers. It's owning the fact that you have answers, but the reason you're not sharing your answer in the moment or whatever it is for a different purpose. And so it can be really helpful in building this culture. So I'm glad that you found that helpful and seen a positive impact for that.
Yes, and I have been in some leadership trainings, and sometimes people are trying to change their way of doing things, like as leaders, and for the people, for their teams, that seems a little strange if they don't talk about that. Yes. People like you used to give answers, and then you stop giving answers and start asking questions, and then the employees, they just get lost. They don't know what is happening. So I think it's something very useful.
Yes.
Now sorry.
No, go ahead. It lays that foundation. So yeah.
Now we have one question here. What is more difficult, to learn or to unlearn? And how can we equilibrar? How can we level experiences of the past with innovation?
Oh, those are some really provocative questions. And if you were right here in front of me, whoever's asking that, I would ask for some follow-up questions and doing the same thing I just did with Luciana. I can speak from my own experience. I think for me, unlearning is harder than learning, because we're having to replace neural pathways that we've already been deeply ingrained with new, stronger habits, because we don't actually ever like replace habits. They exist in our neural pathways, but what we have to do is build the muscles of stronger neural pathways. When we're learning something new, we don't have anything there to be overcoming. So, if we can create that good habit from the very beginning, it'll be easier. So for example, my name is Katie Anderson, and I have to tell you, I have a telling habit, and I have to work really hard and intentionally each and every day to not show up and interrupt people and give all my ideas, even if they're great ideas and I want to help, because it's not always the most important thing in that moment. And I've gotten a lot better at holding back, but my urge is still there. But with intentional practice over the last 10, 15 years, I've really, really gotten better, and I'm more aware and stopping before I go there. But that neural pathway, that desire to do that is still harder. So I think it's harder to unlearn, and we have to practice harder. And then I forget the question. There was something about innovation in there too.
How to mix the past experiences that you have with the innovation, how to level both things.
Yeah, so I would say, how can you use your past experiences and use them as a reference point for learning, right? So our past experiences may or may not be the same as something that's currently happening, but we often make that assumption of, because we've seen something in the past, it's going to be the same as applied here. This is why we jump to solutions a lot of times. So to hold back at first and say, okay, what are the conditions here that we need to solve? And what's the real problem we need to solve? And then think about, okay, once we've defined that, what can we leverage from our past that might help us think about things for here? Or what are some new ideas that we have? Or how do we integrate them and build together into something even more and bigger? So that it's how do we first define what that problem is that we're trying to solve, and then bring in both the past experiences and new ideas as well. I have a question for you, Luciana, and I was thinking about this today. We had the opportunity. So I want to first say thank you for translating the book into Brazilian Portuguese, because, and I was thinking about the process of writing. Writing a book is really challenging. And a lot of it is because we have to synthesize information. I mean, it's complex and it's hard, but like the clarity that comes from the messy process. I also think it's hard. I can imagine, I haven't done this myself, but translating a book, not word for word, but with the spirit of what the author intended, is also a challenging process. So I'm curious for you, like, what did you learn more deeply through reading and rereading and trying to reframe in two languages intention of my words and Mr. Yoshino's stories into a different language?
I don't know. I think that when you read and read again, you were going deeper. And now I was giving like leadership training, and I was all the time I was referring to the stories in the book.
Yeah.
I was building meaning, and because it was in me, but in translating, you don't think a lot about what you're reading, but the things are going inside. And then when I'm giving the training sessions, the things come to my mind, the examples come to my mind, and I'm using a lot of the examples of the book now. Because yes, and that's like it's not something that I have thought of, but they are inside me now.
Yes. Well, you know what? Even Mr. Yoshino says he keeps reading the book over and over again. And sometimes he's surprised. He's like, oh, I get so caught up in this book because I'm like interested in what's happening. But he even uses it as a reference to the stories and like experiences and key insights. So I thought that was beautiful too. I know we're wrapping up towards the end of our time, and I just wanted to let everyone know who's here now or listening later. I'd love to connect with you. And I've also started a new podcast called Chain of Learning, because we are all together in what Mr. Yoshino referred to as a chain of learning together as leaders and learners. And that's the intention for me in creating that podcast and in writing the book. So please listen into Chain of Learning on your favorite podcast player, and please connect. And I am so appreciative of our global connection here together to share and learn together, no matter where we are in the world. It allows me to fulfill and embody my purpose. So thank you all for being here. And thank you for the Lean Global Connection.
Thank you, everybody. And I hope you have enjoyed as much as I have. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye. All right. Do we have to?
I have to stop.
How do we turn it off? Maybe we have to leave.
Yep.
Okay.
Ah.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye. Bye.